Welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into a serious topic: environmental extremism. Now, before you grab your pitchforks and tiki torches, let's be clear. Caring about the environment is not extreme, it's actually quite sensible, like remembering to bring a reusable bag to the grocery store, or finally figuring out what those little recycling triangles on plastic actually mean. However, while protecting our planet is crucial, some actions taken by extremists can do more harm than good. We're talking about tactics that are about as effective as trying to put out a fire with a bucket of gasoline. Let's start with a practice that sounds like it belongs in a low-budget action film: tree spiking. Imagine, if you will, a lumberjack happily going about his day, chopping down trees like a lumberjack is contractually obligated to do. Suddenly, his chainsaw shrieks, sending metal shards flying through the air like confetti at a robot's birthday party. That, my friends, is the sound of a hidden spike, often a simple nail, embedded in a tree, meeting its nemesis: industrial machinery. Now you might think, well, that'll show those lumber companies. And sure, the image of a surprised lumberjack covered in sawdust and mild disappointment is somewhat amusing, but the reality is far less comical. Tree spiking is incredibly dangerous, and not just for the unsuspecting lumberjack, who might suddenly find himself short a limb, both literally and figuratively. It also poses a significant risk to mill workers, who could be injured by flying debris when the spiked log makes its way through the machinery. But wait, there's more. Not only is it incredibly dangerous, but it's also incredibly ineffective. You see, spiking a single tree isn't going to save an entire forest. It's like trying to stop a hurricane with a windsock. In fact, it can often lead to more logging, as companies may need to clear a wider area to compensate for the damaged trees. It's a lose-lose situation, really. And let's not forget the environmental impact. Damaged trees are more susceptible to disease and decay, which can spread to other trees in the forest. So, instead of protecting the environment, tree spiking can actually end up harming it. It's the environmental equivalent of trying to help someone with their sunburn by rubbing sandpaper on it. Now let's mosey on down the dusty trail of environmental extremism to a practice that's about as effective as a screen door on a submarine cutting fences. This seemingly harmless act is often done in the name of animal rights or environmental activism, but the consequences are far-reaching and often disastrous. On the surface, it might seem like a victimless crime. A simple snip of the wire and the animals are free, right? But the reality is much more complex and troubling. After all, who hasn't fantasized about taking wire cutters to a particularly unsightly chain-link fence? It might feel like a small act of rebellion, a way to stick it to the man. But when it comes to fences on farms and ranches, the stakes are a bit higher than just keeping your nosy neighbor's dog out of your prize-winning petunias. These fences are essential for the safety and management of livestock. You see, those fences serve a crucial purpose: keeping livestock contained and, more importantly, out of harm's way. They are the first line of defense against a myriad of dangers. Cutting them down isn't some sort of grand gesture of animal liberation, it's a recipe for chaos. The animals, unaccustomed to the world beyond their enclosures, can quickly find themselves in perilous situations. Imagine, if you will, a herd of cows, giddy with their newfound freedom, stampeding through a farmer's market, knocking over tables, trampling prize-winning pumpkins, and generally causing a bovine-induced frenzy. It's not just a mess, it's a potential hazard for both the animals and the people around them. But the chaos doesn't stop there. The ripple effects of such an act can be felt far and wide. Once those cows escape their pasture, they're free to roam wherever their little hooves take them. Often into areas where they can wreak havoc on delicate ecosystems. They can wander into forests, wetlands, and other sensitive habitats. They can overgraze native plants, trample sensitive habitats, and pollute waterways with their, well, let's just say byproducts. This can lead to long-term environmental damage that takes years to repair. And let's not forget about the poor cows themselves. They are not equipped to handle the dangers of the wild. Without the protection of their fences, they're vulnerable to predators, traffic accidents, and getting lost in unfamiliar territory. It's a perilous world out there for a domesticated animal. It's like releasing a group of kindergartners into the wilderness with nothing but a juice box and a vague sense of wonder. They might be curious and excited, but they're also incredibly vulnerable. So, while the intention behind cutting fences might be rooted in a desire to help animals, the reality is far from a heartwarming Disney movie. It's a misguided effort that often leads to more harm than good. It's more like a nature documentary gone wrong with a dash of slapstick comedy thrown in for good measure. The best intentions can sometimes pave the way to the worst outcomes. Chapter 3. Freeing Mink, a Recipe for Ecological Disaster. Now let's wade into the murky waters of a particularly misguided form of activism: releasing mink from fur farms. This act, while seemingly compassionate, is fraught with unintended consequences that ripple through ecosystems and communities alike. Now I know what you're thinking, John. Fur farms are terrible. And yes, the conditions these animals endure are often heartbreaking. Those poor, cuddly little mink deserve to be free. And you're not wrong. The sight of these creatures confined to small, barren cages tugs at the heartstrings. The conditions on fur farms are often deplorable, and the idea of animals being raised solely for their fur is about as appealing as a mayonnaise bath. The cramped, unsanitary conditions are a stark contrast to the wild habitats these animals are meant to thrive in. But releasing mink into the wild isn't the answer. It's a well-intentioned but ultimately flawed solution. It's like trying to solve a house fire by throwing gasoline on it. The immediate action might seem helpful, but the long-term effects are disastrous. You see, mink are not native to many parts of the world. Their introduction into non-native environments can cause significant ecological imbalance. They're often raised on fur farms in countries where they're not naturally found. This means they lack the natural predators and environmental checks that would normally keep their populations in balance. So when they're released into the wild, they become invasive species, wreaking havoc on local ecosystems like a bull in a china shop, but with a much higher cuteness factor. Their predatory nature disrupts the delicate balance of local wildlife. These furry little predators are incredibly efficient hunters, decimating populations of native birds, fish, and small mammals like a tiny, adorable Terminator sent from the future to devour all things cute and cuddly. Their impact on biodiversity can be devastating. They're like the ecological equivalent of releasing a horde of hungry toddlers into a grocery store with no parental supervision. The chaos they cause is both immediate and far-reaching. And it's not just the native wildlife that suffers. The entire ecosystem can be thrown out of balance, leading to unforeseen consequences. The released mink often struggle to survive in their new environment. They face numerous challenges that they are ill-equipped to handle. They're not adapted to finding food and shelter in the wild, and many of them end up starving, succumbing to disease, or becoming roadkill. Their survival instincts, honed in captivity, are no match for the harsh realities of the wild. It's a tragic end for animals that were only trying to escape a life of confinement. The freedom they sought becomes a perilous journey with often fatal outcomes. So, while the impulse to free mink from fur farms is understandable, the reality is that it often does more harm than good. The well-meaning actions of activists can inadvertently lead to greater suffering. It's like trying to help someone escape from a burning building by throwing them out of a window without checking if there's a safety net below. The intention is noble, but the execution is flawed, leading to unintended consequences. Chapter 4. Sabotaging forestry equipment, a counterproductive approach to conservation. And finally, let's end our journey through the backwoods of environmental extremism with a practice that's about as subtle as a sledgehammer to a beehive damaging forestry equipment. This method, often seen as a form of direct action, is intended to halt logging operations and send a message to forestry companies. However, the reality is far more complex and counterproductive. Now I understand the frustration. The sight of vast swaths of forest being cleared can be heart-wrenching, especially for those who cherish nature and its biodiversity. It's easy to feel powerless and desperate to take immediate action. You see a logging truck rumbling down the road, its cargo hold overflowing with freshly cut timber, and you think, "Those monsters! They're destroying our forests!" The emotional response is understandable, but the actions that follow need careful consideration. And while it's true that logging can have negative impacts on the environment, damaging equipment is not the answer. This approach not only fails to address the root causes of deforestation, but also creates additional problems. It's like trying to fix a broken leg with a chainsaw. The damage inflicted on the equipment doesn't just halt operations temporarily, it often leads to more significant issues down the line. Forestry companies, believe it or not, aren't always the environmental villains they're made out to be. Many of them are working towards more sustainable practices, understanding that their long-term viability depends on the health of the forests they manage. In fact, many of them engage in sustainable logging practices, planting new trees to replace the ones they harvest, managing forests for biodiversity, and even protecting sensitive habitats. These efforts are crucial for maintaining the balance between resource use and conservation. Damaging their equipment doesn't stop logging, it just makes it more expensive and less efficient. The costs of repairing or replacing damaged equipment are often passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for wood products. It's like trying to teach someone to swim by throwing them in the ocean with their legs tied together. The unintended consequences of such actions ripple through the economy and the environment. This means that everyday people, who may already be struggling financially, end up bearing the brunt of these actions. So congratulations, you've just made it more expensive for people to build houses, buy furniture, and enjoy the simple pleasure of reading a book printed on paper. The ripple effects of these actions are far-reaching and often overlooked. And here's the kicker: damaging forestry equipment can actually lead to more environmental damage. When companies have to delay their operations due to vandalism, they may be forced to log in less than ideal conditions, like later in the year when it is the rainy season. This increases the risk of soil erosion, water pollution, and habitat disruption. These unintended consequences can be far more damaging than the original logging activities. So, while the anger directed at forestry companies might be understandable, resorting to vandalism is about as effective as trying to win a debate by setting your opponent's hair on fire. It's a dramatic gesture that ultimately undermines the cause it seeks to support. Look, I get it. The world is facing some serious environmental challenges, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed, frustrated, and even angry. But resorting to extreme measures, like the ones we've discussed today, is not the answer. Instead of resorting to extreme measures, let's focus on practical and effective solutions to protect our environment. We need to support sustainable practices, advocate for responsible policies, and work together to create a healthier planet for all. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Let's make sure the only thing extreme about our environmentalism is our passion for protecting our planet. And another video on our channel that talks about ranchers not needing fencing on public lands is attainable without having to cut down the fences without approval. Have a great day, and hit that subscribe button if you like the environment.